So I just want to start by welcoming our audience. My name is Jeremy Green. I'm one of the mentors and instructors here at Rain. And what we have today is a founder's fireside with Justin Bloom. And Justin is one of the founders of BitCork, a business that is disrupting the wine industry. And I just kind of want to set the stage here for our audience. Imagine that you're at your favorite restaurant, you have the wine list in front of you, your wait person comes to the table, suggests a bottle of red or white to go with your meal, and fairly quickly brings that bottle of wine back to the table, nicely wrapped in a napkin, unveils the label, you take a look at it, pulls out the corkscrew, opens a bottle of wine, pours you a taste, and you're all set for a great dinner.
Yep.
But most of us never think about the journey that bottle of wine took from the winery to your table. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So I think when people picture wine, certainly the growing of the grapes and all the time and knowledge and hard work that goes into making a great wine, I think everybody, really pictures and thinks about that. But what a lot of people probably aren't thinking about is that wine typically gets to the restaurant on the back of a big truck from a wine distributor. And in the U.S. in particular, wine distribution is largely controlled by three very large companies that collectively distribute more than 50% of the wine. And most of that wine comes from equally large companies. But when you look at wine as a whole, of the roughly 10,000 wineries in the U.S., more than 9,500 of them are very small wineries that make less than 5,000 cases of wine a year. And certainly in Oregon, that's the overriding 95% plus majority. And so when you think about what wines, these unique, these interesting wines, and how would they get into restaurants? And so for us, BitCork is a wine distributor, but we've created a very different way of getting these artisan wines just in time into restaurants. That's
great. So small business against big business, David versus Goliath. And you're helping David essentially in that battle. How did this all get started?
It started over dinner one evening in the fall of 2017. Todd, who I'm sure we'll talk more about later, and I were having dinner one night, and we were looking at the wine list, and both of us, have a tech background, but happen to very much like wine as well, and it's kind of a hobby. And we were looking at the wine list, and I think both of us made some comment about what an unfortunate shame it was that with all this great food and restaurants in Eugene that there wasn't great wine there as well. And effectively over the course of that evening, we hatched BitCork and said, there's got to be a different way to do this.
So BitCork implies wine plus tech.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about the wine. Tell us more about the tech.
Yeah, I actually brought a prop. Unfortunately, the bottle is empty, but it does illustrate the BitCork. And so for us, the tech part is the BitCork. And so we're pretty unique. The way that our model works is restaurants have an app, and when they place an order for a wine of literally one bottle, if they'd like, of that wine, we do our deliveries using bicycle couriers. And so the way that works is via our BitCork. So when the orders come in, the bicycle couriers get an order dispatched to them. They come into a room. It's basically a couple hundred square feet in the basement of a downtown building here in Eugene. And they come in, they get a door code, and there's an iPad in there, and they tap the name of the restaurant, and lights turn on the BitCorks on the bottles for that order. They grab those bottles, put them into a box, and pedal them out to the restaurant and deliver the wine.
That's great. So you've got software in the app, hardware in the BitCork.
Yep.
What about IP?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we think that there's quite a bit of protectable IP here. So we have patents filed for in both the U.S. and the EU. And to the best of our knowledge, nobody's ever put a tracking device on a wine bottle before. So yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about your value prop. You have two ends of this equation. You have the artisan winery and you have the restaurant. So what's the benefit of doing business with you for the restaurant as opposed to the bigger distributors?
Yeah, so when you think about wine at a restaurant, one of the challenges that they face in Oregon in particular is the amount of cash that they have to invest in inventory. And alcohol in the U.S. is a pretty highly regulated industry, and Oregon happens to have a rule that many other states do, where restaurants have to write a check at time of delivery. They can't use a credit card. We can't offer them credit or financing. So they literally own every single bottle of wine on their list. And so in the past, to be able to have a broader selection of wines, let alone the artisan wines, that's a lot of money to be invested. Mm-hmm. And so in our case, what we offer is the ability for them to get same-day deliveries of as little or as much of any given wine as they like, and wines that predominantly aren't found at grocery stores for a third of the price that they have to charge to be able to pay their wait staff and to deliver that great experience you painted out at the beginning.
So the traditional method is to buy a lot of wine that may not actually ever sell.
That's right.
Right? And so that may run into thousands of dollars if they want to keep a good wine selection. But you're doing essentially just-in-time delivery, and so that must be a huge financial advantage for the restaurant.
Absolutely, yeah, and a lot of our restaurants are now not only carrying a broader selection of wines, so more overall wines, but actually are carrying less inventory overall to be able to support that. So it's given them the ability to experiment a bit. And if you think about it, it's like every restaurant is unique. And for them to be able to offer a huge diverse set of wines, they can specifically pick wines that they think best go with their food, or that best have a story to tell. In Eugene and Pacific Northwest in particular, we're really big on our local food and sustainable agriculture and those things. And wineries are very much in that same kin. And so to be able to present wines that reflect those same values that are local, it gives restaurants an additional part of that story to tell as well.
So you're giving the restaurants a reason to attract more customers, to buy the wines that they really want to have, to buy interesting wines, and save money, attract more customers. That's a huge advantage.
It's kind of a win-win-win for all sides. When you would look at it from the winery perspective as well, they really want their wines and their best wines at restaurants. And so we kind of fill that gap in connecting small wineries with restaurants to provide exactly that. So yeah, it's the response has really been incredible. Our goal in starting this business was effectively to prove that restaurants would buy artisan wine if made available to them. And we've certainly, I think, proven that over the last 6 months, and excited to actually be in Portland as well now and going there and seeing the same great response.
And since it's artisan wine from local wineries, the restaurant customer has a chance to taste it, and if they like it, then they can go to the winery and buy more.
Absolutely, that's the dream. Yeah, and so it's a great way for customers to be able to come in and have a glass of wine with dinner, and wines that they wouldn't have previously seen, and see if they like them, right?
So you're making everybody happy.
I'd like to think so.
That's great. So you've got some co-founders. Talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, and since we're here at Rain, it's actually kind of one of the cool connections here. I actually have 3 co-founders in the business: Todd Edmond, Jesse Ralston, and Jenny Jonak. And so we mentioned Todd before, and he and I had known each other in the past. Both of us were involved with other tech companies in the Eugene area previously, but we never really had a chance to talk much outside of just certain business settings. And so, as I mentioned, kind of he and I originally hatched this idea up, and very quickly realized that neither he nor I had worked in the wine industry before, and happened effectively to get connected with somebody that I had worked with Jesse's wife in the past, and was talking with him one evening, and he said, just stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Justin, you know that I used to work for a wine distributor in Arizona before I moved here." And I said, "What are you doing for coffee tomorrow?" And so, it kind of continued to expand. We continued to talk to more folks, and very quickly we realized that we needed a clever way of getting the wine out to restaurants. And so I was at one of the coffee meetups here at Rain, and saw this really cool bike that Cascadian Courier Collective had brought in. with all this coffee on there. And it occurred to me that they could just as easily deliver wine as well. And so one of the other mentors here, Micah Elkonen, made the connection for us to Cascadia and Courier, and then from there to Jenny for our legal work and others. So, yeah.
That's great. So this whole thing started out with a passion about wine. And I know every time I see you and Todd and Jesse together, there's always a smile on your face. It must be great to work in a business that you're passionate about and where you make people happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, people always say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But this is really one of those cases where we're kind of combining a hobby and something we love with something that we'd previously had experience with on the technology front. And, we've combined them, and I like to say that so far I still love them both.
That's great. So, like you, I worked in the corporate world, and it can be very stressful sometimes. And talk a little bit about the stress you felt then and the lack of stress you feel now.
Yeah, so for me in particular, I was fortunate enough to be the first employee at a technology company, Feeney Wireless, that started here in Eugene back in 2000. And, it was an amazing journey from literally Bob, the founder of Feeney, and myself, all the way through on into ultimately 11 plus years later having a large company acquire us. And, it was one of those things where kind of being through all the aspects of a startup and seeing that, I came to appreciate and really enjoy almost all aspects of it. But in the end, working in a larger corporation, there's a lot of travel. There's a lot of things that you do in interacting with very large teams and others that for me at that particular point, almost 13 years later, my kids were 5 and 2. And I was constantly on airplanes, and it was just, one day and just in going through and realizing that wasn't going to change. I said, I need to make a shift. I need to get back to what it is I really love and find something that I'm able to actually be more than a dad at the other end of the phone. And so that was kind of the lead up into this. And as you say, we have a smile on our face every day. This has been one of those businesses where not only do we get to do what we enjoy and talk to restaurants and talk to wineries, people that are equally passionate about what they do, but we also get to do that here in Eugene and build this here rather than being on airplanes all over.
That's great. So if there's one piece of advice you would give people who are thinking about starting a company, would it be around passion and loving what you do and loving your customers?
I think that's definitely huge. And, everybody always says, do what you love, right? But I think somebody told me years ago, something to the effect of nobody was ever better prepared than you were to do something for the first time. And if you think about it, people start businesses all the time, and none of those people starting a business for the first time knew anything more than I did or you did or anybody else starting there first. And I think it's one of those things that even though it's stressful at times and there's a lot that goes into it and it is a lot of work, it's also one of those things that I think anybody can do. And for me, that realization that nobody was ever better prepared day one than I was or anybody else was something clicked in my mind.
That's great. So tech, wine, marketing, sales, inventory, facility, infrastructure, that costs money.
Yeah.
So talk about how you funded all that.
Yeah, so as you say, it didn't take Todd and I long to realize that this is a business as one that could work anywhere in the U.S., let alone the world. And if it worked, we needed the ability to have sufficient capital to be able to grow the business. And so one of the first things that Todd did after we thought up this idea is he went out and talked to probably 20 plus restaurateurs and told them about our idea. And I went out and talked to wineries. And after getting almost uniformly positive encouragement, we realized that, this is the sort of business that we can't really start small and just try to fund it ourselves entirely. We need investment. And so also through the connection with folks that we were introduced to at Rain, we were fortunate enough to find angel investors in this area and one fund, the Coast to Crest Fund, that it supported us in our initial fundraising.
That's great. That's great. So so you're in Eugene right now. You're
And just starting in Portland.
starting in Portland. So what's your future market penetration strategy?
Yeah, so for us, in the very beginning, it was really to prove that restaurants, if given access to, would buy artisan wine. And we thought we could prove that in Eugene. And if it worked in Eugene, then the goal was to be able to do it in Portland as well. So our strategy is very much to prove that this works in Portland at least as well as it does in Eugene. And so when you look at the numbers of restaurants, especially those restaurants that do wine, Eugene has roughly 50 or 60 restaurants that do wine within a couple mile radius of downtown. Portland has over 450 in that same radius. And so when we look at this, our goal is very much to prove that Eugene is not some sort of anomaly and that this works at least as well in Portland. And if it does from there, our goal is to be in San Francisco and Seattle by the end of the year.
That's great. That's great. So if so, let's go back to the new entrepreneur, the person who wants to start a company. And there's a lot of educational events here at Rain that are offered, both workshops and longer programs like Ideate and Accelerator. You were very successful in business, and yet you still went through Rain.
Yeah. Yeah, the story there is, after I had left my corporate life, I guess you could say, my wife and I decided that we wanted to go on a big tour of the Southwest, and so we got an RV and traveled around and ended up, one of the first places that we went was Napa, which of course anybody into wine knows that there's thousands of wineries in Napa, and I'd never actually been there before. Hard to admit, somebody that likes wine, never been to Napa. But it was true, and very quickly was apparent to me that I had no idea where to go, and so I did probably what most people do. I stopped at one of the places with the blue sign, and if I liked what I saw, I said, basically, where else should I go? And it wasn't even a couple weeks later that I said, it'd be kind of a fun project to put together an app that would be able to highlight and tell the stories about all these small wineries and be able to share that with your friends. And so I started building one. And an acquaintance, Matt Sayer, and I were talking over coffee one day after I had gotten back, and he just made a comment, said, "Hey, have you ever been to Rain? Do you know Joe? And have you ever been in there?" And I said, "No." And he said, you should definitely, maybe think about connecting and running this by a few folks there. And I did, and thought it was a really valuable conversation, and it just kind of brought out other topics and aspects of any business, taking it from an idea into a real business. And Joe just happened to mention at that point that the Ideate sessions were about to start, and it would be great for me to join them and maybe think through some things I hadn't had the ability to put my hands on for a few years. And it was a great experience, and it was also not just being able to meet with other folks like you. I think I met you there at Ideate in the early part of 2017. But also just being able to mentor other folks and kind of thinking through all these different aspects, of this business and starting any business. And it was such a great experience. And then from there, I went through and applied for the actual accelerator, went through that in 2017. And as I say, struck up that conversation with Todd that ultimately resulted in what became BitCork.
That's great. So what were some of the key things you learned in Rain that you maybe didn't know before?
Yeah, so, a very specific one sticks out in my mind, and that's, when you're thinking through a business, and my original business was an app, a big component of that is how do you get paying customers of your app? And even though 10,000 wineries sounds like a lot, if you think about it, where, the most you might be able to get is $200 or $300 a month like a Yelp does, that's actually not that large a number of customers. And they're also far out and remote. And so if you think about the cost of what it would take for a salesperson to go out and get every one of them as a customer versus the amount of revenue you can get, in the end, even though it was a really, really good idea and is a great idea, you'd have to be able to expand into other customer bases as well. And Rain definitely makes you think through these different aspects of things like customer acquisition cost and lifetime customer value and fundable venture scale businesses and all these things that that are such a vast difference between the nugget of a good idea and a great business.
That's great. So, without Rain, do you think you would be where you are now?
I'd like to think so, but no. I mean, really, if you think about it, all the connections and just all the conversations. One of the things in being at Rain is you're constantly in there being asked the same question: what do you do? What is your business? And those conversations, especially in a small business, often open the doors to connections to other folks that maybe were an expert in supply chain, or maybe had a decade of experience in restaurants or in the wine industry or whatever it was in the prior life. And this is kind of like one of those spots in Eugene where people like that are all involved in. So no, because so many aspects of this business, from taking it from an idea to ultimately know what tech needed developed, to get the connections in, get everything going. No, I don't think it would. I think Rain was instrumental.
So talk about the value of all the mentors that you interacted with.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of beyond the, getting the elevator pitch, what it is you do down. I remember in particular going through the accelerator, there's Mentor Day, and it's kind of like speed dating for businesses, and you talk to something like 25 mentors over the course of a couple hours. And I remember one of those conversations in particular, I thought I just did an absolutely terrible job. And I ended up calling that person later that night just to thank them for what I thought I had done such a terrible job with it. And he said, I think your idea has a lot of merit, but have you thought about all these things? And from there, we struck up a number of conversations in there that ultimately he's now joined our advisory board for BitCork. So I mean, those connections, the mentors, the different expertise and the breadth of different industries they've worked in, all of that brings different perspectives and things to think through in any business.
So, at one point in this journey that you're on, was there a point in time when you had an aha moment that, geez, this could really work?
A few, right? So obviously our very first order, on August 16th of 2018, we had our first customer order, and it's like, wow, somebody bought wine from us. But it was a couple months later, actually, that I think the big aha moment for me was there, and it was this. My wife and I went over to Yachats for the day, the Oregon coast, and an order came in on a Saturday. I was in Yachats, Todd was somewhere else, and Jesse wasn't in Eugene, and we had just deployed this tech into our micro warehouse. And it was like, well, this is going to be the crucible here. This thing is either going to completely fly, or this is going to be the best test of it. And the order came in, the courier accepted it, they came in, we get a notification when they come in, we see that the order was out the door successfully, and we see it's delivered. And it worked. And for me at that point, to actually see from end to end without anything there, if it were to go wrong, to see it actually work that Saturday, that was huge. That was like the big defining moment that, yeah, we've done it. We've been able to put something together, and it worked. Order came in, it was delivered in 47 minutes.
Any other aha moments you can think of?
We've been really fortunate over the last couple of weeks to have folks from like the Register Guard and KVL and others reach out and run some stories about us. And in particular, one of those stories, when that ran, we had, I'm not kidding, 15 different wineries within 2 days reach out to us to say, hey, we'd like to learn more about what you're doing. And so to have, without us going out and talking to wineries, to actually have a number of wineries from all over the country, in fact, reach out to us to just have a conversation to learn about what we're doing. And now we're seeing that on the restaurant side too. Restaurants are coming to our website and reaching out to us. It's kind of like, yeah, you get to see that momentum, you get to see the traction building. And so that was definitely an aha moment too.
Yeah, last weekend I just Googled BitCork, and there was entry after entry after entry after entry. So you are getting your name out there.
Yeah.
That's great. So going back to any advice you'd give the young entrepreneur going forward?
Do it. If you have an idea and you're passionate about it, and I remember one of the, a U of O student, in fact, went through the RAIN Accelerator with me a couple years ago, and his name is Max, and I said to him, Max, the worst thing that can happen is you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to learn things that in a traditional business setting that would take years to learn all these things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really true, right? It's like when you're put into the position of not just working in a startup, but founding a business and thinking it through and all the connections and everything else that we've talked about, the worst that can happen is you learn a great deal, mm-hmm. which if you then have to go back and get a job, right? You have way more on your resume. You have way more skills that you've developed. And so I guess I just look at it and say it kind of falls into the, following your passions. And also it's one of those things that there is no real failure, so to speak, other than the fact that you kind of absorb the lessons that you learn. So yeah.
One of the things I learned is that the real purpose of RAIN is not to help a founder launch a business, but to help the founder develop the skills to be successful launching a business.
You're building people as much as you're building companies.
And I can't tell you the number of times over the course of the RAIN program, just the fantastic growth I've seen in people over time.
Yeah.
And of course, looking back, they don't often see it, but as a mentor, you do get to see it. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the great things about being a mentor is just to see that development along the way. Anybody in particular you'd like to thank of all the people who have helped you along the way?
Besides you? No, seriously. I remember at one point you made me make animal sounds to just help me relax and ahead of my pitch. No, a number of people. I mean, John Hudspeth comes to mind, mm-hmm. Shane, Joe Marushak, Micah L. Connon, all, I mean, were, just hugely instrumental in just talking through and thinking through different aspects of what ultimately, this business has become. But, certainly for me, that person that hired me, the founder of Feeney, Bob Ralston, that definitely, mm-hmm. more than anybody, I think that being engaged and seeing somebody who would take the leap from, working 17 years in a public utility to suddenly start a business relatively late in his career, mm-hmm. He's been a huge role model for me over the years. And I think that, certainly of all the people that come to mind to thank, Bob is definitely one of them.
That's great. You guys, I think, just observing from a distance, are a very values-based company.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple aspects of it, right? It's easy to say that when you're talking wine and restaurants, it's a very relationship and customer service-driven business, but it's more than that, right? So as a company gets larger and it grows beyond the ability of the founding team to be involved in the day-to-day of every interaction with your customers, it's really, really important that everybody in that company really understands the core values of the company. And so I think when you're talking values, it's in as much about what are the guiding principles by which, when there, especially in a startup, there is no rule book for how to interact in any given situation. These are those guiding values that you come back to. And of course, in anything, in any business, it isn't just about the good idea, it isn't just about the fundraising. It's about building that talented team and having them take not just some ownership, but put their own passion and pride into it. And it's incredibly important to find the right people, mm-hmm. to continue to grow. And so, yeah, I think, those company values and the mission statement, all those things really do serve a purpose, especially as the business begins to kind of have some momentum, and it goes beyond the ability of the founders to push the ball uphill all on their own.
Would you say that RAIN helped you consider values as an integral part of the business?
Yeah, I mean, I remember one day in particular that the entire day was really focused upon company culture and values. And, certainly, I think most corporations anymore have mission statements and those things, but to really think through the purpose and why those are important, I think it was really cool with RAIN that we actually did have a whole day to think that through, because, it's not just the passion about doing what you love, but it's also about, especially when you're a part of a founding team, you really do have to share values with each other. I mean, that's what is it? Something like 80% of founding teams break up after a few years. And I think that lack of shared values is probably one of those key reasons why that happens.
That's great. How much did Rain cost you?
0.
How much did
Time.
ID8 cost you?
0.
So,
Time in the evenings.
So here we
It's a
have.
great resource. It's a real Eugene economic development success story. I mean, a number of businesses, not just ours, I think would all point to Rain and the mentors and folks that are engaged in it as a key piece of where they're at, where they are today.
So this is a community. At least that's my experience. It's a very supportive community. Any request for help will be almost immediately answered.
Yeah.
By a number of people.
Yeah.
And so you've taken the kind of this community spirit, and you've taken that community spirit into your own company. Mm-hmm. So really your customers, both from the wine and the restaurant side, are a community.
Yeah.
And you support each other, you learn from each other, and can't get any better than that.
No, it really can't. And yeah, as we keep saying, right, this is definitely one of those cases where it just so happened that really this business is just such a reflection of the passion and just the ability to help and have conversations. And hey, what are you doing for coffee tomorrow? I got some questions. I don't really understand this aspect of what cost center should we be accounting for inventory for, and why would we set it up this way versus that way? And there's so many folks in this community that have gotten engaged mm-hmm. through Rain that are eager and willing and excited to actually help, and give back to the community.
So my experience is that not only do you get your questions answered, but you also get to learn about questions you should be asking and aren't.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's like, especially in starting a business, you can only see so far in the crystal ball, and nobody is a master of everything, right? I have a pretty deep engineering technology background, but I certainly wouldn't consider myself an accountant or understanding the finer points of, finance and accounting. And it's like nobody is any different than that. We each have our, skill sets and industry experience and all those things we bring to the table. And so you can only really address and think through and plan for those things that you understand. And so having via Rain and the mentors in the co-founders certainly that connected through here, having that broader, diverse set of questions to ask and to be able to learn, you can better plan for success, right?
That's great. So I just want to thank you for today. It's been fun. And wish you great luck in the future.
Thank you, Jeremy.
And thanks to our audience for listening today. And again, come down and see us here at Rain. Thank you.